Canadian Community Arts Initiative is a non-for-profit organization that we started when we landed into this country 20 years ago, and to promote art and culture in Canadian community at large, primarily in Mississauga, but we reach out of Mississauga, not only Ontario, but Canada itself, and outside Canada as well. So we not only introduce literature, art, performing, as well as literary and any other kind of art, multidisciplinary, within the Canadian community, but at the same time, we do that for Canadian artists by providing them exposure and experience outside Canada as well. So that's what Canadian Community Arts Initiative does. To talk more about the projects of the CCAI, I will invite the artistic director of the organization, that is Asma Mahmood, who will talk to you a little bit about what projects that we are undertaking. I'm sure most of us are familiar with the Mosaic Festival. This year, the Mosaic Festival became Mosaic and not TD Mosaic, because we got our corporate identity. So it's now Mosaic Festival, sponsored by or presented by TD Bank, not TD Mosaic anymore. So we are the proud owners of the Mosaic Festival now. So without further ado, I would like to invite Asma to come here and talk to you about the organization and its activities in brief. And then I will come back and invite our guest of honor and everybody else to come and take their seats. So just bear with us while Asma presents a little bit of background of Canadian Community Arts Initiative. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Asap. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for being here for this wonderful event. We are so happy to see Vassanji here finally. There are a lot of people who come to Mississauga for the first time due to our event. And this is, I think, one of those occasions. So thank you very much for being here. TD Mosaic Festival presented by TD is 2nd and 3rd of August in Celebration Square. Rock the Coliseum is 4th of August. Then we have storytelling with Adil Afzal on 10th of August. The information about, and that is happening right here. It'll be a ticketed event, but so get your tickets at the first priority. The projects by CCAI revolve around art, culture, literature, theater, and making a healthy artistic environment is one of those objectives that we try to reach through our activities. Vassanji's book, I read the second book that is outside for sale, and it's an incredible expose on South Asians' contribution to Canadian society and art and culture. So it was an excellent read. Thank you very much, Vassanji and Nurjan, for that book. I would like to invite now my dear friend Munir Sami to, I would like to invite back Arshad Mahmood to give you an introduction of the.
It is my pleasure and honor, first of all, to invite our honorable guest, Mr. M.G Vassanji, to come and take a seat here. Mr. Vassanji, please. A big round of applause for him, please. And now, let me just give you a brief on how the evening is going to proceed, afternoon and the evening. So this part of the event is going to start with my dear friend Munir Pervez, who is going to talk about the book, what he has. Munir is a writer, a poet, a philosopher, a thinker, an activist, and a great human being that I've known for the last 20 years. And one of the things that I got in Canada was his friendship, and I'm really proud of that friendship. He's a guy who works tirelessly on these projects. He's been keeping the Progressive Writers Association alive. He's been keeping so many other non-for-profit organizations alive. And today, he is actually the groom of the event as well. Sorry, not groom, Shabala. Groom to hamare samne. Shabala is Munir, because he's going to conduct the event from here on. I'm going to pass on the mic to him once I leave. And once Munir's introduction is over, and once Mr. Vassanji has talked about his book, we will also invite Munir to ask a few questions with Mr. Vassanji, and there will be an interaction happening here. After that, we will invite the house to speak and talk to Mr. Vassanji and ask any questions, and a dialogue to take place if you have any questions for him or would like to exchange ideas and views about the book or outside the book as well. So without further ado, let me call here my dear friend Munir Pervez, who will take it from here.
Thank you, Arshad. You exaggerated so much. Anyway, so I will just talk about the program today. But first of all, I want to make a sales pitch again. When we do these events, we want people to buy the books, because the only tribute that you can pay to the author is to read his books. And you'll enjoy it when you buy the book from your own pocket, not borrow from a library or from your friends or whatever, steal from someone. So please don't do that. Just buy the books. So as Arshad said, this is a great honor for us, for Mr. Vassanji to be with us today. I'll just talk briefly about him, who he is. All of you know. So the problem that we have is when we have such a person in front of us, there's a proverb in Urdu, Suraj ko charag dikhana. You cannot show a lamp in front of a sun. And that's what he is for all of us. He's a great Canadian author. So let me just briefly talk about who he is and what is this book all about. A book he will talk himself. So Mr. Vassanji obtained a doctorate in theoretical nuclear physics, and he worked as a theoretical nuclear physics practitioner for many, many years. And then he decided to move to literature. And that was, I think, a good omen and a fortune moment for Canadian public, because he came in and he is now among the top most Canadian writers. I don't put any boxes and parentheses around who he is. He's a great Canadian author. And what he proved to the world, that he is among the only 3 Canadian authors who have got the Giller Prize twice. Giller is a huge prize of Canada, and he got it twice. And 2 others, only one of them went to win a Nobel Prize, so he will also go and win a Nobel Prize one day. We hope and expect. And then, so that's what he got, a Governor General Prize. He is a member of Order of Canada. He's got numerous literary honors and distinctions. And he has been also a recipient of various honorary doctorates and degrees in literature from various universities around the world, not just out of Canada, but also around the world, because he works everywhere else, wherever. The themes of immigration, diaspora, identity in most of his work, which is there. But this book that you see will also have some touch on it, but he will explain the book himself. But let me quote one person who wrote about him. There's a lady named Vera Alexander, and he wrote about his books once and said, struggles with transcultural identity formation, mobility and migration are among the key themes that constitute a family resemblance between Vassanji's writings. His work has been translated, this is important, into Arabic, Danish, French, German, Hindi, Italian, Latvian, Portuguese, Spanish, Turkish, and Swahili. And one day it will definitely be translated in Urdu, because a lot of us are Urdu speakers. I'd like to also highlight, it's very important, and this is normally probably not talked about in a book reading with Mr. Vassanji, but I want to mention it, very important. What highlight his partnership with his wife Noor Jahan, who is with us today, because both of them work tirelessly to create a space, very important space, for authors of diverse origin in Canadian literary universe. They are the one who single-handedly took it, and they're constantly doing it for the last 30, 40 years, because it is not easy to break into Canadian publishing industry for writers of diverse origins. And they have worked tirelessly to make sure that these authors are published in Canada and recognized as equal to all. And that's the theme of Mr. Vassanji's philosophy and the discussion that he always does, that we are all Canadian, we all write as any other Canadian writer, we're equal to everyone, and they give opportunities, and some of their authors have gone to win literary prizes, correct, Noorjan? They won some prize, right? Now, before I request Mr. Vassanji to share from his book, Everything There Is, I urge all friends, request all friends to add his latest book of essays, Nowhere Exactly, and Amna Sayyed, Nowhere Exactly, the book outside. This is a book of personal essays. And Amna Sayyed's book, which is not here, essays on his work, which is called To a Must List of Books, which is Nowhere Exactly, and Amna Sayyed Vassanji, essays on his work. To a must list of books to understand Mr. Vassanji and his work. These 2 books and his book that is coming to this we have today will explain to you all of his work and of his life. So thank you, Mr. Vassanji. May I request you to come and read from you?
Yeah, everything there is refers to the belief by physicists, especially in the 60s and 70s, and 1960s and 70s, that the whole universe can be explained if you understand the fundamental laws of physics. And these laws of physics depend on four kinds of forces. The forces that hold matter together. And it's a very simple idea. People somehow think it's something. It's very complicated. This thing is put together because atoms are stuck to each other. So there are forces that hold them together, and it's a kind of an arrogant belief. But physicists tend to be arrogant, and well, that's what the title is. Now, I was inspired to write this book because I was intrigued by the character of Abdul Salam. What intrigued me about Abdul Salam was, where all the other physicists of his time, Feynman, Gell-Mann, Dirac, and so on, who believed that everything there is can be explained if you understood the laws of physics, and therefore there is no need for a God, because if you understand how everything is put together, what's the point of another creator? Whereas Abdul Salam was very different, unique, you might say, but there might have been others like him who actually believed in God. And belief in God is one thing. Everyone will say, "Oh yeah, I believe," but to go down and bow to God and to talk to Him and so on is a very different proposition. He was an intellectual, a great man, a thinker, and yet I wondered how he could combine these two aspects of thought or behavior together to be a great physicist, to interact with all the great physicists of the 20th century or late 20th century, and yet at the same time go down on his knees and pray. So and then I think in 2015, I think it was, we had some friends over at our house, and there were people from several countries were there for a festival which we had organized, and I put this question to them. How did Abdul Salam manage these two aspects of behavior or belief to it? And there were stories told, and one person said, "Oh, so I heard that his son said this," and so on. But I have to make it very clear. What I thought was I would write a novel inspired by Abdul Salam, but not about him. So I knew that he was born somewhere in Punjab. He went to Cambridge University, where he was considered one of the kind of, you might say, prodigies. So that was I used. And the fact that he then got a job at Imperial College and was again considered a star, and went on to become known as a young prodigy in the United States and Britain and some parts of Europe. But I knew nothing else about him. I still don't know how many children he had, which town exactly his wife came from, how he interacted with his wife. But I knew also that he had a second wife who was an English woman. So again, that intrigued me. It's just how does it work in terms of family and intellectual dynamics. So this is how I come upon this novel. And if you ask the details, I still don't know. I wrote the first sentence where my character is somehow as a resonance with Abdul Salam. I called him Nurul Islam. I had given him a different name. But then Nurul Islam worked, even though I knew at that time that the word Islam has a very bad connotation in the West. It might hurt the book. But I said, to hell with it. I'm old enough that whatever happens, I can live with it. So I still called him Nurul Islam, and that's what he's called, Nurul Islam, which name, as we know, means the light of Islam. Whereas the light of Islam then, also discovers a theory which attempts to explain the universe. So please don't mistake a novel for fact. This is not Abdul Salam, it is inspired by Abdul Salam. So I'm going to read two very short segments. One is where the president of Pakistan, whom I have fictionalized because I cannot use a real name unless you have the ISI coming, through the door. And the president of Pakistan has called a meeting in Quetta following the humiliating defeat of West Pakistan in Bangladesh, what was Bangladesh. And this president comes fuming, because he has to go now to India and beg Indira Gandhi to return his soldiers. So he's called a meeting in what I have called Quetta, but the actual president of Pakistan called it in Multan. I think if you look up Multan's meeting, you will find that. The president threw a glance at General Owaisi. Behram Taimuri was sunk in an ornate sofa in the receiving room of the residence of the chief minister of the province. He was a man of above average height and slightly paunchy, though pictures from student days showed a slim, dashing young man in blazer and ducks who played cricket and tennis. The skin on his face was rough. A wispy grey halo crowned his bald head. He came from aristocratic stock, his ancestors having been wazirs of nawabs in pre-independence India. So he's asking General Owaisi, "Yes, but what's he like?" Behram Taimuri persisted, crossing his legs, joining his hands behind his neck and leaning back. He's asking about Nurul Islam. "A genial fellow," said General Owaisi, "very likable. A devout Muslim, though he's made himself a spokesman for..." "I have been told," the president said, and turned thoughtful. "Our most eminent scientist," he mused. "Does he have to wear his religion on his sleeve? We all believe in Islam, the religion based on which this country was founded. But faith should be like a wife. You have one, that's all. And you show her when required. You don't carry her around all the time." So then after this, Nurul Islam has been invited to Quetta, and he comes in to meet the president in a private meeting. "Come in, Professor Islam. Have a seat." "Adab, President Saab," Nurul Islam said. "It is a pleasure to meet you." Dispense with the Urdu, yaar. This is official business," said the president. "Let's stick to English, or we'll be reciting Ghalib and Mir endlessly and accomplish nothing." Nurul laughed and said in English, "All right, sir, let it be English then. Professor, I've heard a great deal about you. Naturally, we are filled with admiration. What can one say? You are a model of achievement, a beacon to our science students, a blessing to our nation." "With God's assistance," said Behram Taimuri. "I've been lucky." "With God's assistance," said Nurul Islam. "I've been lucky, which may be the same thing." "That's fine," said the president. "We give thanks to him," he glanced up, "in his own time. Meanwhile, we can take pride in your accomplishments, which I understand are considerable." Then he gets down to business. "What do you think of nuclear energy?" asked Behram Taimuri. "That's the subject of this small and extraordinary conference that I have called here in Quetta. I thought I should meet you privately first, hence this meeting. It's a privilege, and I must apologize for the inconvenience. But to come to my point, what do you think of nuclear energy, Nurul Saab?" "I am a firm believer," Nurul Islam said. "It would solve our country's energy problems and bring us into the modern age. So many of our people still don't have electricity. But you must know that I have advised the government on these matters." "Yes, and you've done salutary work with our Atomic Energy Agency and helped us procure the Canadian reactor," said the president. "My point, however, is, what do you think of the military use of nuclear energy?" Nurul Islam's heart took a jolt. He picked up the cup of tea which had been placed before him. Sweet and creamy, Desi style. without his asking, though he didn't mind. The president had received his in a silver teapot, with sugar cubes and milk separate. His eyes met the president's. He said to himself, "Why do I agree to these games? For the sake of my country, to do from afar what good I can. Or perhaps it's vanity." "You mean an atom bomb, sir," he used the layman's term. "Precisely," said the president, to cut to the bone. "A weapon like the Americans used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and which 6 other nations already have, including Israel, and India will soon have." So it's true, Nurul Islam thought. We are to embark on a road to folly, spending millions on a weapon which dare not be used, while millions in this country live in dire poverty. Nurul Islam had already heard from his friend Zafar Khan that the nuclear bomb was the only purpose of this Quetta meeting. He was aware that the majority of the people of Pakistan, especially the scientists, would support a Pakistani nuclear weapon. It was a status symbol, like an airline. It would solve their bruised ego after the humiliation the country had just suffered in the East. Why should only the Western powers or former colonizers have it? Now China had it too, and India would soon have it. But Nurul Islam knew he did not have the heart to endorse it, give his blessing to something with the potential for such massive destruction. How could anyone who had seen pictures of Hiroshima victims speak so blithely about nuclear bombs? But then perhaps he had become too alienated from his own roots and was not used to anymore seeing real suffering. But that's how he was. The only argument he knew that made sense to him for possessing nuclear weapons was that of mutual deterrence. If you have it and I have it, neither of us dares use it. Unless there's a madman among us who doesn't care. And the horrors of the subcontinent's partition, let alone the recent war in the East, had amply demonstrated that there was no dearth of madness on either side. Now I read something more domestic imagined about the life of Nurul Islam. He's sitting at the dining table with his wife in the mid-afternoon, like many of us have done. And it's a kind of friendly moment. He says to his wife, whose name is Sakina Begum, "Imagine, Jan, my darling, trying to explain everything that exists, from the stars to this cup in my hand, how they are put together. That's what we are trying to do in physics nowadays. It may be possible in a sense. But isn't everything there is Allah Himself?" Sakina Begum asked. He stared at her with a smile, and she felt a glow of pride. She was not so naive, and she was his wife after all. "Some people believe that," he said, "but there is a difference. We pray to Allah and we praise Him and His Prophet." "But can't that everything be praised too?" she asked. "Yes, but you don't have to kneel to it or fear its wrath. If you understand the fundamental laws of physics, then you understand how the universe works. And, the physicists will say, there is no need for a God." "But Allah can change these laws," she said. "Then what?" "That, my dear, was a quarrel between Ghazali and Ibn Rushd, or Averroes, as he is also called, 1,000 years ago." "What did Imam Ghazali say?" she asked. "If you want miracles, then Allah has to interfere. If you put a match to a candle, it will catch flame only if the great and merciful one wills it." "What do you think?" she asked. He smiled. "I don't know." "Too much thinking about these matters is not good. It is pride itself," she said. "Like Azazel's pride, you mean," he teased. "And look what happened to him." She smiled. She had never had doubts about him, about God. But then she never asked questions about his creation. She did not need fervor either in her worship, and she certainly could not recite from the book by heart, nor did she need to listen to tapes of recitals of the Quran. It was a man's job to tussle with God. It was a woman's job to tussle with man. but not their Moni, their little daughter. She would be a bright star, like Marie Curie, a great scientist, she would say. But Sakina Begum wasn't so sure about that. She wanted Muni to grow up a normal woman. There was some virtue in being normal, I think.
So basically, in one of your keynote lectures at McGill, you once wrote or said, "My inclination as a young man toward theoretical physics and mathematics and my training and practice, especially as a physicist, are reflected not in my fiction per se, but in my approach per se." We now see a beautiful tapestry of physics, fiction, and faith woven in your recent novel. So do you feel that you have now reached that, mixing together the physics and the fiction, that earlier you said in about 2010 that it was only your approach?
Yeah, this is only the first time that I have actually was able to. It was not an easy task to actually put, my training as a physicist or just physics itself or science into a novel. And in this case, the problem was you want to fictionalize the real people because, you don't know enough about them. And, people don't realize that, the author hardly knows any much even about himself or herself. What about knowing about someone, a scientist from Pakistan? So you fictionalize your characters. But what to do about the science? What to do about the historical events? You can't fictionalize them, especially the science. So it took me a while. As I said, the idea came in 2017, and finally one day I decided I would keep the science, the theory that Abdul Salam and Stephen Weinberg and Glashow independently worked out to find a unity in the forces of physics. And so that part I said, yeah, although I didn't describe the theory, I just said what it does. You can't put a physics theory into a novel or they'll beat you up. But so, I did that. And I used a few, facts from his normal life that he had 2 wives. But Abdul Salam had a wife who was British. She was a professor in Cambridge. Well, I had Nurul Islam go to Harvard and fall in love with the graduate student who was his guide. She was an American from Massachusetts. So I fictionalized some of it. The main idea was also, how does he cope with marriage when he's devoted to his family, devoted to his children, 3 children. I gave him 3 children. I don't know how many Abdul Salam had. And then he discovers a person who is unlike his Punjabi wife, whom he loves. But this woman, gives him something which, his Punjabi wife doesn't give. And so they were very interesting conversation, which I enjoyed making up, which I won't say.
I enjoyed them too. I was just engrossed in the book and I just kept reading it. The other question I have is very simple. In the novel, we find several mention of the golden age of rationalism and science in the Islamic Empire that lasted for about 300 years. Professor Salam brought this also in his Nobel speech. And also, you mentioned Avicenna and Averroes and many others in your book. So just a general comment, and why did you feel that was important for you to bring it in, and what is your own understanding of the golden age of rationalism in the Islamic Empire? I'm not saying the Islam, but the Islamic Empire.
Well, I had, when I was in Boston, when I was at MIT, I also knew some people at Harvard who were studying Islam, and so my knowledge was very little. It was very sectarian, and but I came to know these people, and you have a lot of time to read when you go to an American university. So I read about that, and I think it's common knowledge among people of my background, our background, that there was a time in the history of the world where some of the brightest ideas in science, the discoveries of mathematics, were done by people like Averroes, Avicenna, Al-Biruni, Nasiruddin Tusi, and so on, which the West completely still to this day ignores. And I had the idea that Abdul Salam spoke about it, but I thought, why not? He has to give a lecture at MIT. Why doesn't he talk about that? So I made up the lecture. And I said, but I had to do a lot of research for this book. As I said, I was not brought up in a conventional Muslim environment. So if you see how, Nurul Islam quote the hadith, I didn't know what hadith was when I left home. I had to look it up, and so it was an interesting quest for discovery, of what it meant to be a Muslim for people in a Muslim land, and what the history of Islam was, and the history of, because that time was also a time of free thought, where people could question. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Avicenna believed in reincarnation. He believed in interpreters of God and the Quran, but not one, any number of them, which of course Ghazali then sent a fatwa against him. But in today's time, he would not get only a fatwa, but it would be executed. So it was, for me, it was very interesting, this whole. And that period, of course, is lamented upon by many kind of liberal, or you might call, or whatever, many thinking Muslims, but it's gone. Took Al-Biruni, and Ibn Battuta, and it was, in that sense, they were the leading lights. Avicenna's book was being used in the 19th century, even. But, if you read today's descriptions of the history of science, you will not see him mentioned at all.
Yep. Continue. So 2 words came out. One is that they were the leading lights of their time, and this Nurul Islam also comes in your book. So I consider also them as the leading lights, and I'm considered a kafir also. So that's okay. But then again, one thing very important that's coming, but it's not in your book, but the fact that's there is that most of these very major Muslim scholars, Islamic scholars, I would say, those Arabic scholars, were also persecuted by the states that they were honoring before. And similarly, Prophet Abdul Salam, not just him, but his whole community has been persecuted. And that comes out in between the lines through your book. And did you ever think of that they were persecuted, that this guy is also persecuted? No.
It was obvious.
Yeah.
And that perhaps he was persecuted because he did not support the nuclear bomb. And that's my belief. Some people believe. It depends on where you stand in this belief in nuclear weapons. Some people believe he did contribute to the bomb, and that's what makes him a patriot. And some people believe he did not, because that makes him a humanist. He's against this terrible weapon. So, of course, it was in my mind, but I chose my character to be against it, because I am against it. But you have to remember, all the scientists of those times, barring the first century after the Prophet, were in fact Persians. Avicenna, Al-Biruni, Averroes, of course, was from Andalusia. But Nasiruddin Tusi, they were all Persians, the top scientists of that time, not Arabs.
Yeah, so basically, so he revered him greatly. That comes out in your book so powerfully. But also, he became a peer of Dirac at Cambridge himself, because he became a fellow later.
Yeah.
But then again, in your research, did you find the Professor Salam's students, like Parvez Udbai or A.H. Nair, we had both of them here in Canada. They spoke to us once or many times. Did they have the same reverence toward him? Because Parvez Udbai, who's also your friend, continues to defend him very, very rigorously and fights for him.
You mean Iraq or Abdul Salam? No, Udbai, of course, he doesn't revere, because physicists don't revere other human beings. But he had a great respect for him, and they've written a book together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he still, I sometimes go on YouTube and I see they're talking about the Salam. So that's what became his life's mission, it seems. And he said himself, he left. I always admired Udboy because he was the one who went back to contribute, which I couldn't do, or maybe I was too cowardly to do. So when I met him, I asked him, and we both happened to be in the similar fields of nuclear physics. And he said, we agreed that we both were at dead ends. And he said, if I was as bright as Abdul Salam, I would not have come back. But, this is all I can do, teach others, So, but Dirac was, I'm partly giving my view of Dirac in this book. At 26, he had made one of the greatest discoveries in physics, writing Schrodinger's equation in relativistic form, and predicting so many things that it was all mathematical. It was not observed until some years later. So for me, Dirac is a hero. And I always thought personally, when I use the term God, I use small g. When I say these people are gods to us, that doesn't mean that I'm not replacing the one and only with Dirac. But, so Abdul Salam makes a similar comment. He said, when I thought of Dirac, when I saw him, it was like seeing a vision of God himself, which is actually from a mystical point of view, not wrong. Sufis talk like that, and Ibn al-Arabi talks like that. You can see God in everything. But these fundamentalists, heard this on the radio, and the report went to Lahore, to another guy, from a major fundamentalist, who at the end ends up in Guantanamo. So, but yeah, that reverence for scientists of that caliber. He's always there in young graduate students. I was there. I don't know what they do. They is more into computers. But for us, when we looked at the science and physics textbook and you saw Dirac, Feynman, Gell-Mann, they were like gods.
So let's also talk about the nuclear thoughts of Salam, or peaceful nuclear energy, because when I mentioned Hudbai, and also later another nuclear physicist, A.H. Nair, who was also direct student of Professor Salam, came to us and spoke to us, and the Nobel Prize winner Paul Lanier also came, and we were talking about against nuclear proliferation. So it seems that they did pick up something from him, where they have devoted their energy for peaceful use of nuclear power. That's what.
Well, as I said, depends whom you talk to. Always Ubdoy says that Abdul Salam did contribute. Whereas if you look at a book called The Islamic Bomb, they were just panicking about Islamic Bomb, but it has a lot of information. And this guy did an interview of someone called Usman, who said that he did not contribute. And by contribute, what do you mean? If you give some idea, that doesn't mean you actually have to put it together. And I didn't follow this trend too much, because I had created already a character who was against the bomb. Whatever Abdul Salam did, or whatever Parvez Udboy says.
So I mentioned about reverence for Professor Salam. So I just want to mention and acknowledge that we have among us Jamil Chaudhry here, who was at Imperial College. He sat at the floors listening to Salam lectures. He was there when his Nobel Prize was announced. And he was also a Trieste. So we found some sample of Professor Salam. So students should come and meet you. Thank you, Jamal Sahab. The last question that I have, I will combine something and then I will give it to others, is Professor Salam said in an interview, the science is science and universal. There's no Islamic science or Jewish science. You also said in an interview that, and I found it, you have people saying, oh, he's an African writer, he's a Tanzanian writer, or an Asian writer, or a Muslim writer, but I don't consider myself Muslim or Hindu or anything else. You don't call Margaret Atwood Christian writer. You also do not like attempts to pigeonhole writers along communal, religious, or other lines. Should we, as readers, be pigeonholing Professor Salam as a Muslim scientist, or an Ahmadi scientist, or a Pakistani scientist? Or should we not just recognize him as a physicist and as a beautiful human mind?
Well, I think if you ask any scientist, at least of my generation, new people have come in, so young people will of course have their own new heroes, but Abdul Salam is just Abdul Salam. He put together this theory of the unification of the weak and electromagnetic interaction, which was the first step towards what they now call the standard theory. And that's it, I mean, there have been other scientists. Hargobind Khorana, he got a Nobel Prize in biology, and he grew up a few miles from where Abdul Salam grew up. And again, he's not considered a Hindu scientist. He was just a scientist. And we were all proud to see that guy. That's Hargobind Khorana. That's, didn't matter who he was or where he prayed, or if he prayed.
So thank you for taking my naive questions. So I'll open to the public. This gentleman, right? Please call your name. Stand up and call your name.
My name is Zohaib Mali, and I'm from Ahmadiyya Muslim community, and it's a privilege to be standing here today. Just want to ask you a question, developing on the same question that has been asked you previously, that you write a fiction book on Dr. Abdul Salam. Have you ever thought of writing a book on Dr. Abdul Kalam? You also have known about many Muslim scholars or scientists, and even though you have mentioned Ibn Arabi as well.
No. I mean, you see, writing novels is not like a plan. The idea just comes. And Abdul Salam, as I said, the idea came in 2017. It took me a few years to actually decide, yes, I think I will do it. I wasn't sure how I would do it. So Abdul Kalam, I don't know much about him. I'm learning about him because people are now talking about how he learned. He prayed on one hand to the Quran, did his namaz, and then he had a guru, and he believed in the Ganga, and he was very considered it pious, and he also fasted, but he did the Hindu rituals. So I'm intrigued by that because for me, purity is anathema. Anything that's pure for me is harmful.
Mr. Vistamji, my name is Arif Raza. Your main character is named Nurul Islam. It appears to me to be a bit naughty and a challenge to a great number of Muslims who hold Abdul Salam, on which the story is based, as challenging them. Is my observation, is there some truth in my observation that you chose it deliberately as a challenge and being a bit naughty?
I'm not sure. I think it was also a challenge to those anti-Islamic, thought current now. As I said, I thought using the word Islam would throw off reviewers and, people like that, but it didn't matter. In terms of consciously defying, I think it didn't occur to me, but I think it might have been there in the back of the mind, Once I picked a name, I was going to stick to it because once you put a name in a book, in sentences, it carries a certain resonance. You can't just change it like, you can do it on the computer, but in your brain, it doesn't work. The name has to sort of, if you pick another name, it has to have the same sound, the same rhythm. And for me, Nurul Islam worked, and to pick another one, somehow I knew this was it.
All right, Mr. Vassanji, thank you so much. I guess I'm curious to understand from you, what kind of reaction have you had which you did not expect from this book, both positive and negative? I mean, you talk about a number of aspects in this book, including Abdul Salam or Nurul Islam having two wives as an example. I mean, somebody would say that's stereotyping Muslims. That would be one aspect of this. You have some observations about some of the leading lights of Muslim civilization. And then by your own words, you wanted to deliberately use the word Islam in there. So I'm curious to see what kind of unexpected reactions have you gotten?
It's very hard to get any response these days because the cultural climate is such. I think I got some good emails for people who had known, who actually of my generation who sort of knew in Abdul Salam and Stephen Weinberg and so on. But other people, especially from South Asian communities, they really loved the book. And an American public, sort of internet publisher on internet really loved the book. She wants to do more with it. But we live in very difficult times with regard to publishing. But the book is going to come out in India in a couple of weeks. And the publishers are thrilled. I have to see I think the response there is the important one. But here is a dead kind of end. There was one review done, almost a friend of ours forced a review on the Globe and Mail, and it came out and it was glowing, but it didn't tackle the subject of the nuclear weapon, which was so important. But it was a good review. But it had been basically browbeaten the book review editor. I won't name the reviewer. You might be, But otherwise, it's just, it's a very depressing scene in the literary world. So I'm very happy and also curious about the Indian situation. And if they can, send the books to Pakistan, that would be wonderful too. Or maybe Munir can send some books and hope they are not confiscated at the border.
So before I invite Mujahid, I'll just comment on Munir can send the book. Faiz once said a line, "Phir hum hi qatl huwaye yaro cholo, let's go and get killed." You are just inviting that to happen, and he will try. Mujahid Shaisa?
I have basically 3 observations. I've yet to read the book because I've just bought it. And you very kindly signed it. And this will be taken to Pakistan.
Oh.
And it will be shared.
Okay.
Because I think that fictionalized or not, it is a book about a personality who stands out, not as a Muslim, but as a scientist of tremendous value, recognized all over the world. You spoke of Hood Boy. I know him well. He struggles, continues to struggle against all kinds of opposition, all kinds of fatwas, and there's no dearth of them.
Mm-hmm.
But my problem is that I haven't heard a word, please correct me if I am wrong, I haven't heard a word against Professor Abdul Salam, or even for that matter, Parvez Hoodboy, in any of the other Islamic countries. And Islam, I say that because, in my opinion, humble opinion, Islam wasn't born in the subcontinent. It was born elsewhere.
Yes.
And we have taken, in Pakistan particularly, have understood that we have some kind of a superior right on pronouncing about it. We have Sufis, saints, we have their annual urses. Who are they? And what makes them different from Mirza Ghulam Ahmad? I don't know. What little I have read or researched, I don't see too much of a difference. And I have followed this community that we talk about, to which Professor Salam, I'm not an Ahmadi by choice or anything. I don't know what I am. When people ask me what I am, I say, I am a Muslim. That's it, period. The thing is, in this part of the continent, the basic tenets of Islam were forgotten a long time back. You said question, ask questions, discuss. This was the basis. Unfortunately, we don't allow that to happen. In fact, currently, we don't allow anybody to say anything. Because there is an MPO out there, maintenance of public order. So anything I say against anything, I could be hauled up and put behind bars. So the thing is that although the Ahmadi community has been singled out to bear the brunt of the hatred that the fanatics out there, and that is not 250 million people, that's a small number of people, but who burn and do all sorts of things to members of this community. So many friends of mine have fled from Pakistan elsewhere because of the treatment that is given.
There's a question in there.
So the thing is that in this character, in my opinion, represents your book from what you have read so far and I've heard so far, represents the thought that currently is taking root in a lot of the younger generation in Pakistan. With education, it is happening. And that brings me to my last request. And that is, if I take the courage of translating your book into Urdu, would you allow me to do that?
Of course, yeah.
So first of all, thank you for writing this book. I know it was fictionalized, but I learned a lot, so much about, a little bit about science, about Pakistan, about their media community, etc. So I really appreciate it. I have a very simple question. Every chapter starts with, I think, the lowercase gamma, is that right? And why did you decide to do that? Just a simple question. The header of every chapter.
Oh, gamma. I guess it's a very important symbol in physics. It stands for the electromagnetic interaction, in fact. Gamma rays.
Right.
I could have alternated gamma and E.
Yeah.
Didn't occur to me. But I just felt it's a whim, But gamma is a symbol of the electromagnetic interaction.
My name is Tariq Hamid, Mr. Vassanji. I just want to know what was the flow of the thoughts for this book? Was it Mr. Vassanji thinking for Nur Islam? Or did you ever allow Nur Islam to think independently, challenging your own thoughts?
You mean, not quite understand. You mean, was Nur Islam challenging me? I think most of it must be mine. But put in context, his defense of marrying twice. I mean, I just put myself in his position, and then I know the criticisms of that practice, but also the alternatives in the West that happen, which he again tells this woman, because when she says, he says to her, "I have a brilliant idea. Why don't you be my second wife?" And she said, "What do you think I am? I'm an American woman." And then he said, "What about your own society and how it treats women?" Anyway, but I think if I were honest, I would say it's every book reflects the author's thoughts, but then I think, but the author should be able to have different thoughts. For example, when I put myself into his wife's mind, when she says, "I want my daughter to be ordinary," for me, I think it's a very profound thought, in the sense that, being a genius is very painful, And she said, "I just want her to be ordinary, marry a kind of carpet merchant and be happy, in a posh neighborhood." But so I, in that sense, it was not my thought, but myself imagining her.
Sir, can I ask you something about this book? Isn't nowhere exactly. So in this book, you talk about identity crisis. Do you still suffer from that one, having spent so many years in Canada?
I don't know. I mean, it's very personal. It's how I feel. Some people say the opposite, although sometimes I wonder how honest they are. But for me, Toronto is my home. I feel safe here. Except in winter. But generally, it's a good city as far as cities go. But whenever I'm in Dar es Salaam, my whole attitude changes. I talk to people in a different way, and I think if there was a measure of happiness, someone would say it's higher there. But it just is there. And then when I went to India, my world changed also, because I had not been there. My mother had never been there. My father tried to go there but was sent back because he didn't have a passport or something. And but when I went there was so much that was familiar, in spite of the hostile climate there towards Muslims and so on. If you don't broadcast your faith, you're just anybody. And or try to find an apartment. You might get into trouble. Or start eating meat in the train. But generally, I felt there was so much of me there still. So then where exactly do I belong? Because in Canada, they expect you to say, I come from hell. Now I'm in heaven. I said, my best years were spent in Dar es Salaam, I will not deny that. Things may not be so good after I left, but it is still home. It is where, it is where you grow up. So last year, the government of Ministry of Education invited me to a prize giving, not to give me a prize, but just to be there as a witness to a prize giving in Swahili literature. So I went there for 4 days. They sent me a ticket, hotel, so on, and I felt it was my duty. They were honoring me. I should go. So I went there, and then when I was coming back, the elections were just around the corner, and there was a sign there. It's in Swahili, Nani kama mama, who is like mother, because the president of Tanzania is a woman. They call her mama. So he said, who is like mama? And that's why, again, it really hit me. He said, who is like mother? So this land is my mother. And I think many of us who come from different parts may be happy here, safe here, have lots of money to spend, travel here and there. But there is a part of you that, at least for me, was left there.
So very good.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Vassanji. Thank you very much, Munir, for conducting this whole show for us. Thank you very much for registering for this event. This is first of its kind. We will be presenting many more. We have William Dalrymple is planning to come back. We have already launched 2 of his books. The CCAI did. We did one in Ram and we did one in Aga Khan Museum. This time we intend to do that in Mississauga. So we would like to bring more of these activities, people, the stature and the image of scholars like Mr. Vassanji himself to Mississauga, so we can all benefit from his contributions to the literature and to everything else that we call everything there is. Thank you very much.